James Baldwin once said, "I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for that reason, I insist upon the right to criticize her perpetually." It's interesting to me that such criticism has come to seem unpatriotic. I can say quite personally that I love Christianity more than any other religion, and exactly for this reason, I insist upon the right to criticize her perpetually. Criticism isn't necessarily a bad thing, I don't think. It means you're paying attention, you're looking closely. After one way to be uncritical is just not to care, not to pay any attention. A couple years ago, I was with a friend of mine. This friend cares a great deal about food. He pays close attention to it. He cooks with great care. My friend had lost someone very dear to him, and he was planning the funeral service. And on top of the heartbreak that my friend was experiencing over this loss, he was also struggling with options for food after the service. "Jonathan," he said, "I just don't know if I can bear the thought of serving cold cuts after the service." I thought it was wonderful how much he cared. I think it's a wonderful thing to care, to pay close attention, and to be able to say, "This is really good," or also, because you're paying close attention, to say, "This is not good." So I bring all this up in order to give you faithful churchgoers permission to look at our parable today, this story in the Holy Scripture, and say, "This is not good. I don't like this story." That's okay. It's a hard story, isn't it? An owner of a vineyard hires some workers to start working at 6 a.m. Some more people come at 9 a.m. He hires them. Some more at noon, hires them. More at 3 p.m., hires them. More at 5 p.m., hires them. The siren sounds downtown at 6 p.m. The workday is done. Everybody line up. All right, to the people who work 12 hours, here's a full day's wage. Keep up the hard work. There you go. To the people who started at 9 a.m., that's still a full day. Good deal of wages there. To the people who started at noon, half day's wage. There you are. To the people who started at 3, here's a bit of money. Go see a movie, get a drink, come back earlier tomorrow. And to the people who started at 5, we're glad to have your names down. Keep coming to work right in the morning, and we'll get you in shape. That's what I would say if I was overseeing people who were working here. But that's not what the owner of the vineyard says. Every person is paid the same wage. It's not fair. Our Ash Wednesday service was rescheduled, and we had it this past Wednesday. It was not a crowded night here. We had our choir, and we had our 2 cooks, and we had a fan section of about 12 people. It's been so heartening recently to have more people in worship. Everybody makes everybody feel better. And I think that this is the exciting thing about crowds. They make it seem like something important is going on. A couple months ago, Holly and I were in uptown Minneapolis, and we saw that there's a new pop-up restaurant on Lake Street. We'd read about it and thought that it would be very crowded. It was supposed to be quite good, and we were there kind of during a quieter hour, at least so we thought, about 4:30, an early dinner. There were still a lot of people there, but we got a table. We tried the food, and it tasted really good, and we had a couple more bites, and it tasted a little less good. And by the time we finished, we thought, this wasn't that great, but there were so many people around. You sat yourself, and the moment Holly and I got up from our tables, people came to get the spots where we were sitting. Then a couple weeks later, we found ourselves without kids on a Saturday afternoon again, and I said to Holly, "Should we go to that really busy restaurant that we don't really like and see if we can get a table again?" And Holly said, "That's a great idea. Let's try it." So we went, and it was crowded, and we got another table, and we were underwhelmed by the food. But there were so many people there, and it was so much fun. And I thought of this last Wednesday night when there weren't very many people here, and it was a little bit less fun. And I think of that in regards to today's story as well. Because not only do the people who start at 6 a.m. have a longer day's worth of work, but it probably wasn't very much fun at the beginning of the day either, when it was just that great big open field in front of them, and very few hands, and very little progress. That's not fair. The first year and a half I worked here, I was called as a half-time minister. A month or so into the job, though, it became apparent to me that if our church was ever going to grow enough to support a full-time minister, either me or whomever would come after me, that I was going to need to start working full-time immediately. So that's what I did. And it was a ton of fun. Being a pastor is a great job. Being your pastor in particular is a great job. There aren't a lot of jobs where you have the flexibility to be creative and you get paid to talk to people and write sermons and design worship. It is great work, and I'm so happy to do it. But can I tell you what made me a little angry while I was your halftime minister? It wasn't the nature of the work. It's good work. It's fun work. It wasn't the pay. My family and I have enough. It was thinking about the leaders who came before me. Leaders who didn't do this or that, or wouldn't do this or that. And thinking about how they had been paid full time. Are you kidding me? That's not fair, I thought to myself. Sometimes it's not even what you're doing that's upsetting. It's comparing yourself to others. And that's what happens at the end of the story today. The people who start working at 6 a.m. say, that's not fair. They've worked 1 hour and they're getting paid the same. Well, I hope I haven't embarrassed you with this confession from the pulpit. It's important that you all know that pastors are people too. We are jealous, fickle, sinful, and the pulpit needs to announce that. We can't pretend otherwise. And maybe you have experience with pastors who are jealous, fickle, sinful over your 170-year history. It's a fact of life. And maybe sometimes you're jealous, fickle, and sinful too. Maybe you'd feel the tiniest prick of resentment if you worked a full day in the fields and there was dirt under your fingernails, and at the end of the day you blew your nose into a white tissue and it all came out black and brown because there was dirt stuck to the nose in your hair too. And maybe you'd feel the tiniest stab of jealousy or resentment when your boss paid you at the end of the day and then someone else drove up in a convertible with their golf clubs in back and stuck out their hand and got paid the exact same that you did. It's not a good story. It's not a model for a good economy. It's not fair. How do we explain people working 85 hours, getting paid the same as people driving around in a convertible with golf clubs in the back? It's not fair. It's funny, we're reading a lot of parables in church this time of the year, and the parables are hard. There is no one single meaning to a parable. They're mysterious, and you need to play with them and hold them and look at them differently, but they're hard. They're hard because a lot of them are divisive, and bad things happen to people. 3 weeks ago, John Ross preached about Jesus and the parable of the wheat and the weeds. And Jesus tells us to let the weeds grow with the wheat, which is kind of a relief. It sounds non-judgmental. We should not be in the position to decide who stays and who goes. That's good, that's good. But that parable ends with us hearing that God finally will separate the wheat from the weeds, and that the wheat will be thrown into the furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then next week, we're going to be reading another parable about a big wedding party, a great party, and everyone is invited. The attendants go out into the streets and say, come in, we're having a party, you're all invited, great news. But you need to be warned that if you come in and you're not wearing a suit coat, you're going to be thrown out into the outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. I can understand why someone would read these parables, hang on to the worst, most vicious possible interpretation, and say, that's it. I can't be a Christian if this is what it means to be a Christian. And the history of human civilization has borne this out. Just look at what Christianity has done over the past 2,000 years. But then there's a problem with today's parable too. But it's the exact opposite. Christ's teachings, the kingdom of God, is too open. It's too accepting of people who have done next to nothing. Really, I think this is what people should point to if they're going to reject Christianity. I could never be a Christian. Are you kidding me? Those people are way too accepting of others who are worth nothing. Can you imagine that? At the beginning of the sermon, I assumed that most of us would take an issue with the unfairness of this story. That was Fred's commentary upon hearing it the first time. It's not fair. It's bad economics. And then to illustrate, I shared a personal anecdote about a time when I worked very hard and felt kind of frustrated comparing myself to others who worked less hard but got paid the same or more. Upon hearing this story, right away, I assumed the position of someone who started working at 6 a.m. And I wonder where you assigned yourselves when you first heard this story. When did the proverbial workday of your lives begin? 6 a.m., 9 a.m., noon, 3 p.m., 5 p.m.? Can you think of times when you have not been fairly compensated? Can you think of times when you haven't been recognized for good things you have done? I think we can all think of those times. They stick with us. A couple years ago, I was shopping at my store. At my store, I think they have some sort of jobs training program. I'm not real familiar. I just read it on the wall. And I think it sounds like a great program. It says, we prepare people for work. So what I assume about this is that they bring in people who maybe couldn't find jobs elsewhere and coach them how to work better. It sounds like a great idea. My assumption is that a lot of the people that they hire maybe don't have a whole lot of options for where else to work. They need special coaching. This day at this store, I was in line, and the man working at the register didn't look like he had attended a selective college. Didn't look like he probably had a glowing resume with many distinguished earlier experiences. He looked like someone who maybe works for a jobs training program. He had homemade tattoos on his arms. He had just a few teeth. He had a twitch on the side of his body. And the person in front of me in line walked forward, and they greeted him. They said, "Hi, how are you doing?" And the man at the cash register with the homemade tattoos and just a few teeth said, "Me? I'm doing better than I deserve." I don't know how long his shift was that night. I don't know how much he got paid. But in that instant, maybe he had just been working for 5 minutes. In that instant, he made whatever might be achieved through a full work day. Whatever might be achieved through an entire career He made all that seem pretty poor. Better than I deserve. I think he knew exactly what the kingdom of heaven is like.